This is a preview of the Darphopia the Godless Land audiobook. The full audiobook is available wherever audiobooks are sold. 1. The Story of the Gen People. He is a young man in his late 20s wielding a rapier he has had since his youth. With a head of messy blonde hair and a garb of metal training gear, he fights in the small training room of the Palace of Bladelheim. His sword strikes the thick, two-handed blade wielded by the other man, who is much bulkier than the first, though seemingly of a similar age. The other man, dressed in similar garb, has greasy black hair. He is skilled with his blade, he always has been, and it is not long before he fells his opponent. The blonde fighter tumbles to the padded ground. "You win again, brother," he says.
"'Tis Prince Akuni to you, young Ricky,"
says the black-haired one rather coldly. Prince Ricky smiles. "You wish to parade your victory was a jest, I see." Prince Akuni helps his brother back to his feet.
"Aye, a jest it was. I need not receive your calling me Prince. Akuni-sama is fine."
Prince Ricky sprouts a smile. "The day I give you my calling you Akuni-sama is the day I shall transfigure into a shrew."
"Then perhaps another bout instead."
Prince Ricky sheaths his blade in a scabbard strapped to his side. "I'm afraid I must decline. I have a promise to keep."
"With whom, if you mind not my asking?"
Prince Akuni sheaths his blade as well. "With the first-year class in the schoolhouse."
"Ah, I imagine the youngsters shall quite enjoy a visit from a royal."
"Perhaps. I'm to give them by telling them about the history of the Gen people."
"And a fascinating history it is."
Prince Akuni smiles fondly, recalling back to a time when he was a first-year student learning of such things.
"Perhaps you would wish to receive some pointers? Why, it would be quite a shame to have my brother ridiculed by children."
Prince Ricky removes his metal training gear and puts on a black shirt he had placed on the floor. "A kind offer, brother, but I shall receive not any such help from you. I'm daft not. I have learned from the times before. 'Twould be daft to seek not advice, would it not?" "Aye, which is why I shall seek out Father-Summer and receive his advising me. You would know not where he is, would you?"
"I dare say he's overlooking the training of the Royal Guard again."
Prince Akuni cannot help but roll his eyes. Prince Ricky smiles, as he does for most things. "No need to make your distaste so apparent, brother."
"When I'm King of Bladelheim, I intend to bring about great change."
"This again?" Prince Ricky rubs between his eyes.
"Father-Summer has ruled for quite some time. 'Tis time for a change, for a new vision."
"Bladelheim is being ruled just fine," Prince Ricky asserts.
"Aye, but it could be better. To start, we could give the slaves our freeing them."
"Brother, speak not in such foolish tones. Bladelheim requires two things, money and development. The freeing of the slaves would surely damage both those affairs."
"We need not enslavement to achieve such goals."
Prince Ricky scrunches his brow. "Be not absurd, brother. Have you had not hearing of the Gen countries? America, Egypt, England. Their development and riches came from slavery. It's the history of humanity."
"Think outside the box, brother. If we free the slaves now, we shall gain good favor from the other kingdoms. Furthermore, we shall lose not riches or development, because I intend to hire some of the Futsu people."
"Hiring that much work would be a cost too great."
"No more than what the slave owners are paid for use of their slaves. The Futsu are poor. They shall mind not being paid inadequately for unethical work."
"How is that any better than the current method?"
"It's not really. But to the other kingdoms, we shall appear to be a progressive and forward-thinking kingdom and gain good favor the world over. A clever plan, is it not?"
Prince Ricky shakes his head. "Adieu, brother. As I said, I have a promise to keep." Prince Ricky leaves the training room and his brother behind and arrives at the bustling Bladian courtyard. The courtyard, being the center of Bladelheim, is where anything that is anything happens. This is where dancers perform, merchants sell goods, ceremonies are held, and countless other things happen. The magnificent Palace of Bladelheim surrounds the courtyard. The palace is very much akin to a medieval castle, though the Darphopians wouldn't know it. Their knowledge of Gen events tends to blend together. It wouldn't be unlikely to meet a Darphopian who believes that medieval castles house residents who owned robotic assistants. At any rate, none of that takes away from the majesty that is the Palace of Bladelheim, the most notable features of which are the 4 towers erected at its 4 corners. At their tops fly yellowish-brown flags marked with an emblem. It is a character from the language of old, and acts today as the mark of Bladelheim. Prince Ricky stands for a moment, taking in the majesty of the courtyard.
Fresh shrews! Get your fresh shrews right here!
Do you want to use a power omnipotent for more than just turning on a tap? Sign up for the Ken Academy and learn to wield the power omnipotent like never before. Only 3,000 and a moon. Prince Ricky heads out to the royal training ground, which is just on the other end of the courtyard, and through the opposite entrance to the palace. But before he can depart, his attention is drawn by the flapping of wings. From the bright and sunny sky, a man soars down with a red satchel strapped to his side. Though most Darphopians tend to look the same, it has in fact been centuries since anyone has had a skin color that was not a light tan. This man has white feathers to match his wings, talons, and beak. These types of people are called Toli. They are a subdivision of the Homo sapiens and were discovered long ago in the Gen times. However, much of their origin remains still unknown. The Toli swoops down and accidentally crashes into a merchant's stand.
Damn it to hell,
the merchant exclaims.
You daft Toli! Have you any idea how long it took me to build that stand?
I'm so sorry. My actions were truly unforgivable, says the Toli, in a snivelling voice. He bows to the merchant deeply.
Where's your master? I shall have words with him.
My master is on the other end of the kingdom, sir.
Well, you should be taking better care of his slave. I have half a mind to whip you into shape myself.
The Toli cowers. Please, I'm terribly sorry for my actions.
Just leave. Get away from me, you dastard.
The Toli takes no time to obey the command. He wanders around for a bit until spotting Prince Ricky. He approaches and bows before the prince deeply enough to bare his nape, the utmost sign of respect. Prince Ricky-sama, he says. Hi. The prince stands over the Toli attentively. The Toli slowly straightens his back. I come bearing a letter for you, Prince-sama. All right. The Toli bows again. Yoroshiku. He opens his satchel and raises his wings slightly. A letter, surrounded by a blue misty aura, rises from the satchel and into the prince's grasp, after which the aura disperses. The letter informs that the first-year class will be moved to the garden near the eastern gate. After the prince reads this, he presents the letter back to the Toli, who then proceeds to levitate it back into the satchel. I would receive your telling the sender that I have been informed thusly and shall act accordingly. Of course, Prince-sama. The Toli bows again, and just before departing, he respectfully says, Shitsure. The Toli flies off, and the prince continues walking. He goes through the courtyard and into the opposite entrance to the palace. Inside, he is met with a corridor lined with the empty husks of robotic people. It is said that these robots fought in many wars for the Gen people. Their skin is far lighter than a regular Darphopian's, since they were fashioned after the Gen people themselves. These days, however, they are no more than decorations for the palace. Prince Ricky doesn't take much note of these decorative artifacts as he travels down the corridor, up a spiraling marble staircase, and to the balcony of the royal training ground, where he suspects the king to be. Father-sama, he greets, bowing slightly. The king faces him, fully garbed in his royal wear, yellowish-brown armor, a sheathed sword, a golden crown, and a faint black cape with the Bladelheim emblem on it.
My son, what a pleasant surprise,
he says, in a booming, yet withered voice.
Come, join me.
The king motions to the stone balcony, and Prince Ricky joins his father. They look out over the royal training ground, a large garden with fountains and hedges on either side. The royal guard is grouped together in a rectangular formation, each member wielding a double-edged blade through which the power omnipotent can be channeled. The commander of the royal guard stands separate from the rest. He yells these words, Ken o ageru! The guard raise their swords and repeat, Ken o ageru! Ken de sashikomu! Comes the commander. The guard thrusts their swords forward. Ken de sashikomu! Ho-sama! Ho-sama! Zutto! Zutto! Mamoru! Mamoru! The king looks to his son.
Striking, is it not? I thought it would make the guard more menacing to receive their chanting in the language of old.
Hi, very striking, Father Summer. What does it mean?
I shall raise my sword. I shall thrust my sword. I shall forever protect the king.
For a moment, Prince Ricky is awe-stricken by this. Then his brow scrunches ever so slightly. Point of inquiry, Father Summer. To my knowledge, you know not the language of old. By what means did you go about teaching the guard to say this?
There is a family known as the House of Damashi near the kingdom of Aimheim. They are amongst the only few Darphopians who retain the language of old. I received one of the guard members going to the House of Damashi and receiving their translation. The task did cost several thousand yen, but it was a worthy endeavor, I think.
Hi.
Now then, to what do I owe the pleasure of meeting you here, my son? Unless you've come just to see my ugly mug.
The king bellows a hearty laugh. Well, it's always a pleasure, Father Summer. But I've come in hopes that I might receive you advising me.
Concerning what?
The king has a jolly smile. He prides himself on giving good advice and relishes the chance to assist. I have a promise with the first years of the schoolhouse later today, and was wondering if you have any suggestions regarding how I might gain the favor of the children. The king mumbles for a moment.
You need only be yourself, Ricky. I dare say that shall be quite enough for first years.
Aye, mayhap that shall be enough.
Sound not so uncertain, my boy. You should do swimmingly, I'm sure.
Prince Ricky nods slightly. Thank you, Father Summer.
Mention it not.
I'd better be off then.
With not those garbs, I hope.
The king stares at Prince Ricky's plain black shirt.
Garbs of this kind. It's not becoming of a royal.
Hi, Father Summer. I was, of course, going to change. The king goes back to looking over the guard.
I would hope so.
Prince Ricky bows slightly to his father before returning to the corridors of the palace. After a few twists and turns, he arrives at his bedroom. Despite his being a royal, the prince's room is rather small. It is furnished merely with a bed, dresser, and the husk of another robot. This one fought not in wars, but was instead the personal assistant of one of the prince's ancestors. It is fashioned after a Gen female, though knowledge of whom exactly is forever lost. If one looks closely at the neck of the robot, they will see markings in the language of old. Of course, Prince Ricky doesn't speak the language of old, and so he doesn't know what it means. Prince Ricky picks out his royal armor from the dresser. It is a sturdy yet flexible garb, designed for battle and ceremonial endeavors alike. It bears clearly on the metal chestplate and arm pads the same yellowish-brown color that is so synonymous with Bladelheim. Between these metal plates is a soft black material that allows for the flexibility. The prince wastes no time adjusting his garb, fearing he may be late for his promise. He leaves the palace, treks through the courtyard, and heads out to the residential parts of the kingdom. As the name implies, the stony road is lined with small little houses where the nobles of the kingdom reside. Being a royal, the prince can walk nary a step without being greeted by passers-by. Prince-sama, good morning. Prince Ricky-sama, so nice to receive your meeting. The prince passes by a small farm where a Toli is hard at work hoeing the fields. Even she takes the time to bow deeply to her superior. Prince-sama, hello, Yoroshiku. Before long, the prince arrives at the garden near the eastern gate, where the children of the first-year class sit in rows on small stool-like rocks and await his arrival. The class is surrounded by trees and shrubbery that the garden is well known for. A young, studious-looking woman, the teacher, approaches the prince and bows accordingly. Good morning, Prince-sama. I am truly grateful to be receiving your coming today. Yoroshiku. The prince replies with a much smaller bow. For a moment, Prince Ricky is focused on the seated children, some of whom are so giddy with excitement that they can barely contain themselves. Thank you for having me, says the prince softly. Allow me to properly announce your arrival. The studious-looking woman stands before her class and claps her hands. Everyone, please give me your settling. Today, class, we have the esteemed honor of receiving teaching from the Prince of Bladelheim himself. I hope you will all show him the proper respect. The woman motions for the prince to take her place in front of the children. "Good morning, everyone," he begins. "As you may already be aware, I am Prince Riki Yamamoto, and today it has been requested of me to give you all my telling you the story of the Gen people and the God War." "Everyone," the teacher interrupts, "are you forgetting not something?" In response to this, a girl in the front center of the class stands and speaks. "Kiritsu!" The entire class responds by standing in unison. "Right!" The class bows to the prince and says, "Yoroshiku! Chakuseki!" Everyone sits back down. The teacher smiles cheerfully. "Very good, class." Then she looks to the prince. "At your leisure, Prince Emma." Prince Riki clears his throat. "All right, class. I wonder if any of you know anything about the Gen people." A few hands are raised. The prince points to one and says, "Hi." The called-upon girl stands. "I know not all that much, but I know that most Darphopians like not the Gen people." "'Tis correct. In fact, it's against Bladian law to speak highly of the Gen people in the presence of a royal." "But why, Prince Riki?" asks the boy. "Chare," the teacher scolds. "You must never forget your honorifics. 'Tis Prince Riki Summer. Furthermore, if you have something to say, raise your hand and wait to be called upon." "I'm sorry, Sensei." "'Tis quite all right," the prince assures. "To speak to your question, allow me to tell you the story of the Gen people." The class settles and prepares for the prince's story. Mukashi. Back in a time when a story would never begin with Mukashi, but, more commonly, once upon a time. In this time, known as the Gen times, Darphopia existed not yet. There were, in fact, 7 continents that were further divided into hundreds of settlements. The inhabitants of these lands were the Gen people. They used not the power omnipotent, they had technology with which to gain power. A hand rises. "Hi," the prince calls on a boy. The boy stands and speaks. "Prince Riki-sama, what exactly is the power omnipotent? I mean, where does it come from?" The prince draws his blade and presents it to the class. It begins to glow with a ghostly blue aura. "This is the power omnipotent," he says. "'Tis used by warriors to strengthen their weapons, and 'tis the same means by which many tools are operated, from the refrigerators of the nobles to the water pumps of the futsu. As for the origins of the power omnipotent, it once belonged to God, before it was usurped, of course." Another child's hand shoots up, and, once called upon, she stands to speak. "Usurped, Prince Emma? Who did that?" "You shall soon discover," the prince says, sheathing his blade. "The Gen people got along with one another not always. They fought many, many wars. Some of the most famous were World Wars I and II, the War of 1812, and the French Revolutionary Wars, among others. But none were more famous than the God War. 'Twas a war to end all wars, caused because the Gen people had come to realize that their religious diversity was holding them back from making informed decisions about the future of humanity. Everyone believed in different stories that told them to live their lives in different ways. The Gen people wanted unity, and they fought each other to achieve it." Another hand rises. "Hi." The girl stands. "My grandfather says that the Gen people fought wars with robot machine things that look just like them. Is that true, Prince Emma?" "Aye, it's true. The robots were slaves to the Gen people in the same way that the Toli are slaves to us, and the Tokag and Sokrana are to the other kingdoms." The class stares in amazement as the prince continues. "The God War first began in the Gen country of America. Propaganda and falsities were being spread about what they considered to be foreign religions. Due to the multicultural nature of this country, this propaganda caused them to be plunged into civil war. And by the vast influence of this country, other countries did the same. The superior countries in the God War were the ones ruled by dictatorships, and the ones that were single-minded. The fighting continued for a full 10 years. There were many, many casualties. The war came close to its end when the day finally came, the day that God showed himself to the world." A girl raises her hand and stands once called upon. Prince Riki-sama, why did God show himself?
Even today, there are none who know. But God's appearance was problematic, to say the least. There were so many creation myths in the Gen times, and God went against all of them. In one fell swoop, humanity's faith was extinguished. The remaining years were filled with resentment, as humanity began to question what right God had to be all-powerful and still give them no vanquishing of evil throughout the land. A God who so callously was unlike anything they had imagined. None thought this more than those who never gave God their believing in him in the first place. For the next 5 years, the Gen people worked to create a device that could take them to God. Although it is unknown how they did it, the Gen people created a path to God, and upon their arrival, they usurped him of his power. Those people thought what we think today, the power omnipotent is better in the hands of humans than in the hands of God. After this, the God War concluded. In an attempt to restore peace throughout the world, the 6 people who were responsible for taking God's power used it to bring the 7 continents together into one massive land, and in doing so, brought the world's people together. The power omnipotent was equally divided amongst all the world's people, so that no one person would ever have the same level of power that God once held. That land came to be known as Darphopia. A boy raises his hand and stands when called upon. My mum says that it's against the law to channel the power omnipotent through your own body. Is that so people can use not their power like God, Prince Summer? 'Tis, yes. Channeling the power omnipotent through one's own form is punishable by law. The class expresses their amazement at the story just told. However, the prince's lesson is cut short when one of his retainers comes to call upon him.
Prince Riki-sama, Yoroshiku.
The retainer bows. Prince Riki stares at him carefully.
You look flush.
Has something happened?
'Tis terrible, Prince Sama. 'Tis King Sama. He's fallen ill.
What?
King Sama requests your presence. Please, I must receive you following me at once.
Of course. The prince looks to the teacher of the class.
I hope you can forgive my hasty exit.
'Tis worth mentioning not, Prince Summer. You shall, of course, receive my understanding.
I am grateful. Shitsure.
The prince bows slightly and makes haste with his retainer to the royal infirmary.